saying hi in the chat. Okay, so Matthias.
All right.
Where are you? There you are. Good. So Matthias is up again. You're the big celebrity today.
Oh my God. After seeing all the celebrities yesterday in the group, I felt really verklempt, but it's better now. Okay. Yeah, it's a totally different story than yesterday. I want to talk a little bit about hardware. And so let me see if I get the screen sharing going. So you should see, hopefully, the internal workings of a MessagePad. Is that okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, cool. All right. So the red frame shows the ROM board. And again, Apple was, or the Newton team was really looking into the future by allowing us or allowing to exchange the board or also to produce it later. And when the rest of the hardware was done and it wasn't soldered in, so they could do fixes afterwards. And it was very smart. And I was always intrigued by the ROM board and what could be done with it. And I didn't have the internal documentation yet, but I saw the pins up there, and the connector that they're using is actually a really old RAM connector. So I was wondering if the pinout was the same, if something could be done with it. And I found out the pinout is not the same. But I looked at the ROM board, and you see the two chips. Those are the ROMs, 16-bit each. And I found it interesting. But then Frank Gründel came with the ROM board. So that's the normal ROM board. And he had a board that looked like this. And you can find it on the webpage. And you see there are 3 chips on there. And there's one more chip on the backside. So there are 4 chips on there. And he was wondering what the board does. And of course, he plugged it into a MessagePad, and nothing usable really happened. The screen got all scrambled, and at least it didn't destroy the machine, but that was about it. So I thought we do the only thing that a sane person obviously does. We build a little printed circuit board that can read those ROM boards. And what you see here is basically a board that goes on top of an Arduino and just plugs into the Arduino. And on the lower half, you see that's the connector, and you can plug the ROM board in there. And then bit by bit, I can read it through the Arduino and give it over the USB port into a host machine. And we did, and it worked. And we found some strings and some graphics on that board. And it was interesting to see that it had the format of a MessagePad 2000, but it didn't have any graphics in there that had grayscale. So the board was probably made for some in-between machine. So this is how this looks when you plug it onto an Arduino. And I know it's a pretty dirty board, but anyway. Okay, so that was fun. But then something popped up on the mailing list that was really interesting. And if you look, it says internal RAM or internal flash is almost 12 megabytes. And I know that the machines have 4 megabytes. Where did the additional 8 megabytes come from? So I looked at the ROM board again, and if you look at the backside of the ROM board, oh my God, there are footprints for 4 more chips. So if the ROM chips up here have 8 megabytes, why not put RAM chips on here that might have 8 megabytes? Maybe that's how this was done. So I got really curious, and I wanted to know what those footprints do. And so I started to desolder the ROM chips. Then I took some sandpaper, and I took all the paint off the top of the printed circuit board to get to the copper layer. Made a scan of the copper layer of the front side and of course the back side. And then I saw that this was not all connections. So this is a 4-layer board. So I took off more of the PCB and created a lot of dust. And this is what I found. You see that the holes are different. Some holes have copper around them, some holes have nothing around them, and some holes have insulation around them. So these are connecting through the ground plane or the 3-volt plane. And I did that with the backside too, to end up with a really thin ROM board in the end. And then I marked all the connection that we're going to ground and to +3 volts. And then I followed all the traces on the copper and put that into a CAD program. And yeah, this looks all pretty chaotic at this point. But the CAD program then had an export function to put it into a PCB software. And that looks a lot less chaotic. And if you look at it, this is already a true PCB. And it's not only the traces on the board, but once you generate the traces on the board, at the same time you get the electrical wiring, and you can make a plan of the entire board. And this is what this is. And we see in the bottom, that's the connector. And by then I had the pinout of the connector, and U16 and 17 are the original ROM chips, and the 4 chips on top are the unknown pads that were still on the board. So unfortunately, the result of all this was that this is all wired in parallel. So the reason why the ROM board has those free spaces on the bottom is that Apple wasn't sure if they could get masked ROMs that were big enough. So they made space for smaller ROMs on the backside. But at the same time, I learned a lot about the pinout, and it indeed is the case that you can put more RAM chips, flash RAM chips, onto the ROM board and generate 8 additional megabytes of flash RAM. So that is actually possible. I also wanted to verify that my layout was correct. So I took this layout and sent it to a PCB maker, soldered the original ROMs back on, and it actually worked. So this is the resulting PCB that I got back. Soldered everything on, and it worked right away without any problems. To do some experiments with adding my own flash, I mean, the idea was that today's flash chips have easily 64 megabytes of storage. So we could actually put 2 flash chips on there, one for the lower 16-bit, one for the higher 16-bit, and then see if we have custom versions of the ROM, and at the same time additional flash memory all put into one single chip. And so my plan was to have these printed circuit boards made, and then wire something with air wires to see if I can get that going. And the programmer that I showed you in the very beginning would have helped to put the initial ROM file in. And so I could have checked a new layout, and I could have made circuit boards. Unfortunately, I never got around to do that. It was I just didn't have the time. When this was all done and finished, the job got very busy, and also there was just no more time to do it. But yeah, the remnants are still there, and it was an exciting and fun story around this. And let me see how I get the video back, so you can see me. And yeah, I even made a few printed circuit boards, but the soldering is so bad on those. I don't know if anyone is interested in reading their ROM boards out. It was fun. It's not going really anywhere. I don't know if having 12 megabytes inside the machine would be any different to just plugging in a PCMCIA card with an additional 8 megabytes of flash. So I didn't really follow up on this, but I thought it's a funny story. So here we go.
Thank you, Matthias.
Great, yeah.
All right, anybody have questions? This is
I might have a question.
Go ahead.
A long time ago, we were talking about this, and I was asking if it was possible to not only read the ROM with your board, but also write it. Because if we could write such a ROM, it would be very cool. We could do lots and lots of interesting things, like creating localized emails, for example. The email OS is only available in English. So it would be pretty easy probably to make a German, French, or whatever version of the Newton OS. Did you ever get around to making these ROMs writable with your Arduino?
The circuit board that I have there could definitely write them. We would have to make a flash ROM board first to be able to write it, but that was the intention, and that would definitely work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be cool.
I don't know if it's easy to make a German eMate ROM, because a lot of stuff, words, lists, and so on are compressed, and I don't know if they're encrypted, but definitely compressed. I have not looked into that too much, but I know that people on the lists have more clue about that.
Yeah, it has been some time when I last looked at that, but my impression was that most of the strings were pretty much at the same place in the ROM. So it would, my impression was it would be comparatively easy to like change them. The only challenge would be to generate a different kind of checksum. There's certainly a checksum in this ROM, and you cannot change any values at random. So you have to make sure the checksum will, at the end, when you're finished, will still be okay. That might be the greatest challenge.
I know the does calculate some checksum. I don't know if it's the checksum that we need, but there's definitely some calculation going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think you might run into string length issues too, because you really have to disassemble the firmware and change the strings and then reassemble it so that the addressing is all correct. Not impossible though.
At least in the Newton script part, it's absolutely obvious and marked what are strings and what is text and so on. It's in the C++ part, it's quite more difficult, but manageable. Yeah.
My high school German is a little old, but I do know that your words go a lot longer than the English words for certain things. So it would definitely need more space, I imagine.
And we love to put umlauts everywhere just to annoy others.
Techromancer, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. On these Newton MessagePad circuit boards, I may have missed this because my connection went out. But what model of Newton are those boards? Those boards you're working with for? I was curious.
This particular board is on the MessagePad 2100. The eMate ROM board has a different form factor.
Well, it is a different form factor.
Back, but I think electrically they're similar.
I wonder if I could do a similar thing with my MessagePad 130. I've never really opened up a device before, and I would like to learn how to. Tinkering with like Newton sounds like a really fun thing to do because they're so insanely expandable.
And on Frank's page, you can find exactly how to take those machines apart and especially put them back together again.
Yeah.
I don't think the 130 has a removable ROM. Pretty sure it's soldered in.
Yeah. I'm possibly considering getting an upgraded 2000 or a 2100 in my little collection of Doom. Definitely considering it. Seeing if I find one that's not insanely expensive because most people sell them for like $400.
This is the place to come if somebody has an extra one.
Yeah.
May I jump in for a second?
Oh, sure.
Go for it.
The 130 actually does have a replaceable ROM because there are two versions. There's at least a German and an English version. And the 120, I think, also has a replaceable ROM. The other two, the older two, the 110 and the OMP, do not have a replaceable ROM.
Okay. But those are, those are 8 meg ROMs. Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you, Matthias.
Sure.
This is the second time I see this presentation, actually. The first time was at your house when you showed me.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Are we ready to go to Adam? Adam, are you here? We're a little early, running
I
a
am
little ahead
here.
of
Can you
schedule.
hear me okay?
Yeah, are you ready to go, or do you want to wait a little bit?
I think I'm ready to go.
How do we need
Everyone's
a
ready
break?
for me?
Does anybody need a break? No?
Actually, we have, because Matthias was very quick. I expect more. I expect more. Come on. I'm
Well,
disappointed. So
oh,
because
sorry.
you have,
I mean, I didn't want to do anything with the internal port, and Jake did all that, and I don't want to put something. I mean, his work is a lot better than what I did with it.
we have still
I don't know
a few
about
minutes,
that.
so we can take a little break for everybody. I think it's good to stretch.
Okay, I'm sorry, Adam.
The
I
spine.
forgot about the
No
break.
worries.
So I think that would be a good idea to give a little break. So in this case, let's do a longer break because we are something in the middle of our session. So let's take that 15 minutes break and then we can start on the around hour, okay? If you don't mind, I think could be good. Matthias, your reverse engineering with the board was very amazing. I'm impressed, like, you know, labor work, very delicate, because if you use sandpaper too much, you can destroy all parts, yeah? So that was amazing, great.
I just want to say
Awesome.
also at
Awesome.
the screening, and when we showed the film in Silicon Valley, I was in the room when you talk about filing it down to reveal the layers of the board, and there were gasps in the audience because you know it's a bunch of Silicon Valley types. They understand how this stuff works, so there were gasps.
How long did that project take you?
It was on and off. I think altogether probably 2 or 3 days if I add up the hours. I did a lot of experimenting. I used EagleCAD, which unfortunately does not have a way to overlay pixel graphics. So I went through a CAD program to generate the traces first. And then I even wrote a little exporter to get from the traces to an Eagle file. But if we scrap that part, then probably 3 days.
Are the necessary flash chips available anymore, or are they?
Yeah, I think as we saw from the screenshot, I think the ROM would understand if we put those 4 flash chips on the back, and they're still available. They're a bit hard to come by. You have to buy them from surplus, but people still have them sitting around, and yeah, I think making this ROM board with 8 megabyte flash would be absolutely possible. The alternative would be to use newer flash chips that are much larger and cheaper, but the problem is that the system would not recognize them. So we would have to modify the ROM for it to be able to work with them as flash chips.
You put a microcontroller on there to simulate the the flash chips.
Well, if we want to go that far, I've thought about if I put a 64 megabyte flash chip on there, I could have 8 different ROM versions available for playing around. But how do you switch between those ROM versions? So the serial port would get a little processor that then switches the ROM versions for me. But this is going totally over the top and not really worth the time putting into it. But I think making a ROM board that can do work with the original flash would be pretty interesting. And if I do get the time after the Android version of Einstein is done, then I might actually do it.
Would you mind sharing the PCB files? Because I actually purchased a few of the connectors, but never got around to replicating your Arduino. So I could send some boards out to be made. And
Yeah, I still have 8 or 10 boards sitting around. I'll be happy to send one to you. The files, I think they're available, but I can put all that stuff up on MessagePad. It's Eagle files, and absolutely no problem.
Yeah, most board houses now even just take Eagle. You just send them the Eagle files. They send you back a board. You used to have to like do all this, Gerber stuff, and you don't have to do that anymore. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those are very thin 4-layer boards, but I got some made in Germany, actually, here in town. They're fantastic, perfect quality and really expensive. And then I had some made in Asia for $2 for 10 boards. And they're just as, they work. I mean, I don't know about the quality. I'm not that experienced with those boards, but they work. The only problem is, it's nice to get them made for $2, but the shipping is still $35. So, yeah.
The shipping is the thing that gets me is the time. It's like the turnaround time. I'm so used to, a compiler. You compile, you run your program, you know what you need. But when it's with this hardware stuff, it's like send a design to China and wait 3 weeks, and then find out that you flip the pads or something.
Yeah, or have the polarity wrong on some communication lines. I know exactly how that goes. I have that all the time.
So Matthias, I'm sorry for my ignorance, but I'm a little lost. If I will be able to buy that chips somewhere, and I will able to solder them on that board from Newton 2000, will I have 12 megabytes of RAM?
Well, that was the thing that I wanted to find out, and it's with the original ROM boards that come with the Newton. No, absolutely not. And there's no tricking either. There's 2 connections missing.
So only ROM I can gain, yeah.
You couldn't even gain additional ROM. It's just what they did was they just made spare connectors in case they couldn't get the 4 megabyte ROMs that are on the front.
Right.
They could only get cheaper 2 megabyte ROMs. Then they would put 4 on the back.
All right. Okay. Cool. I was confused.
The pins. The nice thing is that the pins are on the connector. So if we make a new PCB, we can make it so that there can be the ROMs on the front and the flash on the back, or even better, put our own flash in there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Matthias, what was the difference between the 2000 and the 2100? Was it something on the main logic board?
Yeah. They have on the main logic board, they have pads for a different ROM. The flash RAM. The flash chips are 28. I don't know, something 16 for the 4 megabyte version, and for the 1 megabyte version, it's a different chip, and they're funny. They're kind of overlapping. So, but you can desolder the 1 megabyte flash chips and replace them with the 4 megabyte chips. That's, I think, how the upgrades work.
I remember sending mine in for upgrade, and I remember calling them on a weekly basis, wondering when I was going to get it back. They got sick of hearing from me.
Well, we can get the chips. I've never tried, but I think it should still be possible to upgrade it 2000 to 2001.
I have a Chinese supplier who still have the chips, and he sent even 1,000 parts. I bought 30 of them, and I never tried to solder because no time for this, but I have at home actually physically 30 of them, so I can cover 15 2000s and make them 2100, so which I have a plan to do finally. So if someone is interested, I'm happy to provide the contact to that company. I remember after I paid them after 3 weeks, I get the package. So they are quite solid. And I don't remember exactly price, but that was something like between 3 or 4 pounds each. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's about what I paid.
Yeah. So it's not very cheap, but still it's accessible because eventually for each MessagePad you need only 2 of them. Yeah, so it's not very big investment, but I think it's worth to upgrade your 2000 because additional memory is really give a completely different kind of work with the Newton. Yeah, so
for the ROM board you would need 4. But then
I would say it's definitely doable. I did it in the past. I've removed the chips, the original from the 2000, put new chips I took from a RAM board from a computer and soldering this worked perfectly directly, no problem. Nowadays, it's quite easy to go to a mobile or cell phone repairing shop, and they will probably have them removed and replaced with a rework machine quite easily.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually works pretty well. I mean, I've seen people do this. I'm too old. My vision's not good enough for that, but I've seen people replacing those chips, and it's amazing. It works pretty well. I'm actually. It's good that by just replacing it, the Newton OS reinitializes the new flash, and you don't have to put any software on it. I wonder if that would be the same with the additional 8 megabytes, but it's definitely worth trying. So whenever I have a chance to modify the ROM board, I'll definitely do it.
I have a very random story. Hi, this is Walter again. Since we're talking memory chips, I just remembered something, if that's interesting. In the original MessagePad, I may have these numbers wrong, but I think they're right. There's 128K of RAM, and it's the one that has the little button cell backup battery because it doesn't have any flash. It only has RAM. And we had this memory budget because to get everything to run at 128K was not easy. And in fact, we ran out of budget. And we realized that we could get the software in there, but there was no room for any user data, which makes it kind of useless. And so the way I recalled, Michael Culbert had this brilliant idea to put a 5th memory chip on it, which is weird because normally those come in, sets of 2 or 4. But he basically added a region of memory that only has 1 out of 4 bytes populated.
Yeah.
And so I had to write a driver, a storage driver that just laid out everything in the lower byte of all the words to get an extra 32K in there just to store anything in. So that was just a very weird design. But, it worked. But he had to cram an extra chip on there.
Yeah. Well, actually, I saw the results of that in the ROM code, and there's I think 4-lane, 2-lane, and 1-lane flash. And in the description, it actually says the ROM board can also have just this 1-lane flash, which would give it an additional 2 megabytes instead of 8 megabytes. So yeah, it's all there. Someone mentioned the Windows CE machines. They did not have any battery buffer or anything. When you ran out of power by the end of the day, all your data that you entered the whole day was just lost. And since I got a CE machine after the Newton, I was shocked that someone even put something like that out on the market, but it's not like Microsoft ever really cared. So,
well, we had a big discussion about all your data being in RAM. And so that's how we ended up with that complicated mechanical interlock for the battery.
All right,
because you can't take both batteries out or you'll lose all of your data. But you can only enforce that with physics, not with electronics. So the hardware, the plastic guys had to put that little complicated switch in.
After the Newton, I got a cell phone from Samsung that was a Palm phone. It was, I think, the SPH i300, and it was a poor substitute for the Newton, but it did have cellular, which was interesting. And it had remember the Palm devices had the graffiti area, but in the Samsung phone, it had a digital graffiti area that it could be removed in software, except they didn't know there was no SDK. So I reverse engineered it and built my own SDK and published it on the web. And I got a couple of Palm developers who used my SDK for their app. And then one day I got a call from Samsung, and I was really like, why is Samsung calling me? And it turns out that they wanted to use my SDK because they couldn't get it from Samsung Korea. They couldn't get the information from their own company that they needed. And so they wanted to use mine. I was like, go right ahead. I mean, it's I had it open source. It was just kind of funny how like it was a multi-headed Hydra company. And they wound up going to some guy who reverse engineered it to get the SDK that they needed. Got a free phone out of it.
I used your SDK. Very cool.
Oh, you did? You had that phone too?
Yeah, at some point I think I got into that as well, but not for very long. I mean, back then I had very tight schedule working in the movie industry, but yeah.
It was okay. It was, it was all right. It was like I said, a poor substitute for the Newton.
Yeah, but the difference, I mean, at least you could write something, and for the Newton, it was just back then, to me, it was very sad. But it's fun now.
Doug, I notice your hand is up. We're on break. If you want to talk, you can go ahead. No?
Yeah, hang on. I'm trying to get my video started here.
Cool.
There we go. Matthias, I've got your Android app running right now on my LG Stylo 5, and I already broadcast to the group. It's like 1984 again, and I've got a fire lit under my behind. Since we've got such a brain trust here, one question I've always had is, do you know where in the ROM all of the letter shapes are stored? Is that extensible? And does anybody else listening on the conference have an idea if, not that the Newton needs a whole lot of help trying to distinguish all the handwriting, but there's a couple letters where it could use a couple of additional characters, and if they could be extended to speed up some of the text recognition, can it be done this late, either doing it by patching the RAM, getting the characters into ROM, or whatever the case might be?
From my point of view, I mentioned it yesterday that I've been looking into replacing the handwriting recognition with whatever the host device comes with. Beyond that, I don't know, but I think we have the master of the system online, right?
Oh, you're asking me?
I think the author of the handwriting recognition, wasn't he yesterday online? I don't know if he's here today.
I thought Larry Yeager was one of those. Who else would that entail?
Larry Yeager did the printed handwriting recognition system, and the cursive system, which I think was not in the eMate, was by Stepan Pachikov's team, who also did Evernote.
Also, Paul Guyot did a lot, like an extensive study of the handwriting recognition system. I'm sure he can tell you something.
I think it's pretty easy to get in contact with Larry Yeager. I don't know if he remembers everything, but you could probably try also.
Thank you.
Yes, I had the right Newton never dies. Ani Newton.
There were packages that extended the handwriting recognition in certain ways. I don't recall, but I just remember vaguely. Like the name that comes into my mind is Better Touch Tool, but that's a Mac OS app. It's something like that. You may want to look through UNNA and see if there's any.
Yeah, I wrote a couple apps that improve handwriting recognition, or at least post recognition. One was called Right Here. Then I wrote another thing called Corrector Plus and Spellworks that allowed you to handwrite in NewtWorks.